Welcome to your deep dive. You know, we love to tackle those big ideas and bold moves, and today we're diving into Big Bets by Rajiv Shah.
Really getting into the nitty-gritty of how to create lasting solutions, not just Band-Aids.
And you shared the preface in the first couple chapters, so we're ready to unpack those. I think anyone who, really follows global development is going to find this fascinating.
Oh, for sure. It's about moving beyond just, making things a little better and really aiming for transformation.
Exactly. And Shah kicks things off with his time at the Gates Foundation, right in the heart of global health. He talks about this key meeting on childhood vaccination, where Bill Gates asks, how much does it cost to vaccinate a child?
Now, you think about that question, and it seems pretty straightforward, right? But Gates wasn't just looking for a simple dollar amount.
It was more like, okay, let's really think about this.
Yeah, it was a strategic move. He wanted to force everyone in that room to think deeper, to consider the scale of the issue, and uncover all those hidden roadblocks that they might not have even realized were there.
It's like he was saying, don't just give me the easy answer. Tell me what's really going on.
Exactly. And that led to some pretty surprising discoveries.
Especially about the data they were using, right?
You got it. The initial estimate from the World Bank was something like $10 to $25 per year of healthy life.
Okay, reasonable enough.
But when the Gates Foundation really dug into it, they brought in auditors to gather data from actual vaccination clinics in Africa.
Boots on the ground.
And guess what? The real cost turned out to be closer to $84.
Whoa, that's a huge difference.
And it showed that they had been relying on, estimations and outdated information.
It makes you wonder how many other initiatives are based on, shaky data.
It's a reminder to always question your assumptions.
Like Shah did during his internship at the Pan American Health Organization, right?
Oh, yeah. He was analyzing data and found that a new IMF policy would have a really negative impact on healthcare, especially for women and children.
But even with the right data, it doesn't always lead to action, does it?
That's the thing, right? He had the facts, but it didn't seem like anyone was really listening.
It's like having a key but no door to unlock.
It highlights how crucial it is to not only have accurate information, but also to get that information to the right people, the people who can actually make a difference.
So it's not just about crunching numbers, it's about communication, persuasion, really becoming an advocate for the data.
Absolutely. You got to be able to tell the story behind the numbers, make it resonate with people.
And that's where Shah's magic wand question comes in, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. When he was faced with resistance or a challenge that just seemed impossible.
Brick wall.
He would ask, what would you do if you had a magic wand?
I love that. It kind of disarms people, doesn't it?
It shifts the focus, right? Instead of getting bogged down in the how, it allows people to dream big, to envision that ideal solution without any limitations.
It unlocks creativity.
And it can reveal those shared aspirations across different groups, Like, even if people disagree on the details, they might all agree on the ultimate goal.
And did he actually use this with, real decision makers?
Oh, yeah. He used it with everyone, from vaccine manufacturers to frontline healthcare workers to even the former Prime Minister of Norway.
Wow, that's impressive.
And it helped him pinpoint this fundamental flaw. The aid system was set up for short-term relief, not those long-term solutions that could really create lasting change.
So it was a light bulb moment, realizing that they needed to rethink the entire approach.
And that realization led him to propose this bold idea at a meeting at Wilton Park, what they called AFIM, a securitized version of the International Finance Facility specifically for vaccinations.
That sounds like high-level financial stuff.
It is. It's essentially a way to leverage billions of dollars in funding for vaccinations by issuing bonds.
Okay, but the thing is, he presented this idea before he even had buy-in from the Gates Foundation, right?
He did. It was a calculated risk.
That's gutsy.
He knew it was, but he also knew that sometimes you have to make the first move.
Be the cat.
Exactly. And by putting that bold idea out there, he could spark conversation, get people excited, and attract potential partners.
I can imagine there were some raised eyebrows, though, especially from the folks holding the purse strings.
Oh, for sure. There was definitely some pushback, particularly from Shriti Vadera. She was a member of Gordon Brown's Financial Advisory Council.
So right in the thick of UK government.
And she had concerns about, the lack of a financial track record for Gavi, the organization that would be managing the funds.
Which makes sense. You're talking about billions of dollars.
And also, could they really get governments to commit to these long-term payments?
That's a big ask.
It is. But Shah had a counter move. He offered the Gates Foundation as a guarantor for the bond.
Wait, hold on. The Gates Foundation would back the entire thing.
That's right. It was a huge show of commitment, basically saying, we believe in this so much that we're willing to put our money where our mouth is.
That's a game changer.
It addressed a major concern head-on and turned that initial skepticism into, a roadmap for action.
So they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk.
Exactly. And that's crucial when you're trying to build trust and get people on board with a big, bold idea.
I bet that meeting with Bill Gates to discuss the IFM was interesting, to say the least.
That's a story for the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait. Back again with our deep dive into Rajiv Shah's big bets. And last time we left off with him facing those tough questions about the IFM proposal.
Yeah, this new type of bond to fund vaccinations around the world.
And it sounded like even getting the Gates Foundation on board was, well, a process.
Oh, for sure. That was just the tip of the iceberg, Now imagine pitching this idea to governments all over the place.
Each with their own agendas and priorities.
Not to mention budgets and political landscapes. It's a whole different ballgame.
So how do you even begin to navigate that?
Shah had to become this master collaborator, right? Building bridges between the world of philanthropy, governments, finance experts, and people on the ground in global health.
It sounds like he was constantly switching gears, speaking different languages to different folks.
He talks about a trip to Senegal with Molly Melching, who had been working to end female genital cutting for decades.
That seems like a bit of a detour from high finance and vaccination bonds.
It might seem that way, but it was a turning point for Shah.
Really? What happened?
It brought him back down to earth, seeing Melching's connection with the communities she was serving.
Reminded him of the human impact of his work.
Exactly, because it's easy to get lost in the weeds when you're dealing with these global problems, but this trip grounded him.
Brought him back to the why behind all the spreadsheets and financial models?
The faces behind the numbers.
Did that experience change his approach to the IFM?
It reinforced how important it is to listen and learn from the people on the front lines.
Not just imposing solutions from some ivory tower.
Exactly. You have to understand the local context, tailor strategies, and that became crucial as they started building this huge global coalition for the IFM.
But I imagine there was still a lot of resistance.
Oh, yeah. I mean, governments are notoriously cautious about making those long-term commitments.
Especially for something as innovative and, let's be honest, untested as this IFEM thing.
And investors were wary too, It was a new type of bond, and they needed to be convinced that it was a sound investment.
On top of all the logistical hurdles of coordinating between countries and organizations.
It was like this massive bureaucratic maze.
So how did they cut through all that red tape?
This is where Shah's analytical skills and his growing diplomacy really shone,
He had to connect with people.
Yeah, he had to break the problem down, find those leverage points, and tell a compelling story.
Not just, hey, trust me, this is a great idea.
More like, here's how this benefits you specifically, tailored to each audience.
Like a custom sales pitch for each stakeholder.
You got it. He had to show how the IFM could be a win-win for everyone involved.
So for donor countries, it was a way to make their aid dollars go further and achieve more.
For developing countries, it was a path towards sustainable funding for vital health programs.
And for investors, it was a chance to, well, do good and make money at the same time.
It was a new asset class with potential for both financial and social returns.
Speaking of those high-stakes pitches, remember that meeting with Bill Gates?
Oh, the one where Gates called the IFM the stupidest idea he'd ever heard?
That's the one. I bet that was a little nerve-wracking.
Oh, absolutely. But then Gates spent an hour grilling Shah on every single detail.
So it wasn't an outright rejection.
It was more like an intense interrogation.
And Shah had this realization, right, that Gates' scrutiny wasn't a bad thing.
He saw it as an opportunity to make the idea even better.
To refine the proposal, plug the holes, anticipate those potential problems.
So Gates's no was actually the most valuable feedback he could have gotten.
It forced him to think through every angle, really stress test the concept.
And that's such a crucial lesson, right? We often see criticism as a negative.
Something to avoid at all costs.
But what if we embraced it as a chance to improve, to make our ideas stronger?
Okay, so they got Gates on board, but convincing a whole room full of world leaders, that's a whole different beast.
It was, and Shah had to tailor his approach for each one.
Understanding their political pressures, priorities, even their personalities.
For example, there was this crucial one-on-one with Gordon Brown, the UK Chancellor.
Wasn't Brown actually the one who inspired the IFM concept in the first place?
He was, but even with his support, Shah knew he couldn't take anything for granted.
Brown was a savvy politician, so Shah had to frame the IFM in a way that aligned with Brown's goals and concerns.
He appealed to Brown's sense of global leadership, emphasizing the UK's potential role in global health.
A chance to be at the forefront.
And it worked. They eventually got commitments from several countries.
Like the UK, France, Italy, even Sweden and the Netherlands.
It was a big step forward, but even with those governments on board, they still needed the investors.
Right, because good intentions don't always translate into cold, hard cash.
You need to show those investors a return, so they had to structure the bond to make it attractive.
And that means addressing their concerns about risk, which is a tricky balancing act.
And this is where the Gates Foundation's willingness to take a risk really paid off.
They were willing to put their money where their mouth was.
They agreed to guarantee the bond, essentially backstopping the investment and minimizing the risk for those investors.
That's a powerful signal, showing that they truly believed in the IFM.
It reassured those investors that this wasn't just some pie-in-the-sky idea.
But a serious financial instrument, backed by a reputable institution.
And so all those pieces started falling into place.
The big idea, the political will, the financial backing, it all came together.
It's amazing to think that it started with that simple question. How much does it cost to vaccinate a child?
From a simple question to $1 billion bond.
Transforming global health financing. What a journey.
But even with all that in place, they still had to turn this grand vision into an actual plan.
The nitty-gritty details of making it work.
Navigating international institutions, governments, financial markets, and public health systems.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare.
So how did they manage all that?
That's where Shah's ability to break down complex systems and build those bridges between different worlds was essential.
So what happened? Did the IFEM actually launch?
It did, November 2006, a historic moment.
They raised an initial $1.5 billion.
Which went to support vaccination programs in 70 developing countries.
From a simple question to $1 billion reality.
And it shows that big bets aren't just about good ideas.
It takes commitment, collaboration, and that willingness to face the complexities head on.
Turning those doubts into a roadmap for action.
And sometimes you have to take that leap of faith, that first step, to inspire others to follow.
This has been quite a deep dive, and I think it raises a lot of questions about how these ideas apply to our own lives.
What can we learn from Shah's journey to make our own big bets, even if they're not on a global scale? And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Rajiv Shah's big bets. It's been a wild ride, hasn't it?
It really has. From that simple question about vaccination costs to $1 billion bond reshaping global health. An amazing story.
It is, but as we wrap up, I keep thinking, what does all this mean for us? What can we actually take away from Shah's journey?
That's a big question, right? How do we apply these principles to our own lives and work?
Because it's inspiring, sure, but it can also feel a little daunting. I mean, I'm no billionaire philanthropist.
I get that. But Shah's story has these nuggets of wisdom that apply to all of us, regardless of our field or how much influence we have.
Like what? Give me an example.
The power of simple questions. We get so lost in the weeds sometimes that we forget to step back and ask the fundamental why.
It's like we're so busy looking for answers, we forget to ask the right questions in the first place.
Exactly. Questions like, what are we actually trying to achieve? What assumptions are we making? What are the unintended consequences of what we're doing? They seem obvious, but they can really shake things up.
Challenge the status quo, right?
And uncover hidden opportunities.
But asking those tough questions, going against the grain, that can be scary. Did Shah talk about how he dealt with pushback?
He did. He faced resistance at every step with the IFM, from skeptical colleagues to hesitant governments. But he kept going.
Because he believed in it.
He had this deep conviction that every child deserved those life-saving vaccines, and that fueled his determination.
So it's about finding your why, that driving force that keeps you going when things get tough. Because they will get tough.
Oh, absolutely. And that connects to another thing Shah emphasizes, using data to make decisions. It's not enough to just have good intentions. You have to ground your actions in evidence.
Test those assumptions, measure progress, all that.
You got it. It's interesting, though, how data can be so powerful, but also so easily twisted.
I'm thinking about how we all latch on to headlines, but don't always dig into the numbers ourselves.
It's so easy to skim the surface. And remember that discovery about vaccination rates being overreported? That only came out because they were so rigorous about collecting and analyzing the data.
They could have just ignored it, swept it under the rug.
But they faced it head on.
So it's about being honest with ourselves, even when the data isn't what we hoped for.
It's about finding the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And that leads to another insight Shah talks about, turning doubts into a roadmap. Remember how Bill Gates initially criticized the IFM?
Yeah, stupidest idea and all that.
But Shah saw that as a guide, a way to make it better.
So instead of being defensive, he used that criticism to strengthen the whole thing.
Exactly. It's like turning that negative energy into fuel. And this applies to anything, not just big ideas. Seeking out different viewpoints, even critical ones, can help us refine our plans and avoid pitfalls.
He's like a constant feedback loop, always testing, learning, and improving.
And let's not forget about collaboration. That was key to the IFM success.
He couldn't have done it alone.
No way. He had to bring together this whole coalition of partners, each with their own strengths.
It makes you realize that we can do so much more when we break out of our silos and work together.
Right, but that takes skill too. Shah had to be a master negotiator, finding common ground, building trust, creating those win-win solutions. It wasn't about forcing his ideas on others, but finding alignment and shared ownership.
Like weaving a tapestry, bringing all these different threads together.
And when you see how philanthropy, governments, financial markets, and health experts came together, it's pretty inspiring.
So as we wrap up, what's the one big takeaway you want our listener to walk away with?
That we all have the power to make a difference. It starts with asking bold questions, using data, turning doubts into a roadmap, and collaborating with others. But more than anything, it's about believing in your own ability to create change.
Because as Rajiv Shah's story shows, when we dare to think big and act with courage, we can achieve incredible things.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful. Now go out there and make your own big bets in the world.